It's a new, more dangerous era of history.
The sands of security have shifted beneath us.
The keyboard has become a weapon of war. We're under daily attack.
And new threats require new funding.
To prevent war, we must spend more.
A threat so vast, says the government, action is the only choice.
We are at a crossroads in history. It's time to act.
What stepping up and leading means was unveiled today at a Glasgow shipyard.
We face war in Europe.
The Prime Minister committing to the biggest increase in UK defence spending since the end of the Cold War. A surge in spending to match the rising threat level since Russia invaded a European nation.
It means learning the lessons of Ukraine, which I've discussed many times with President Zelensky, to ensure that every capability we have works seamlessly together. Drones, destroyers, AI, aircraft, each different branch of our armed services fully integrated to create an army which is 10 times more lethal by 2035.
The Strategic Defence Review puts forward 62 recommendations, all of which the government says they'll implement, including building up to 12 new nuclear-powered attack submarines, £1.5 billion for at least 6 new munitions factories, 7,000 new long-range weapons, a new cyber command, and for existing troops, £1.5 billion to fix the poor state of forces family housing. The review and the foreword in the review by the Prime Minister and John Healey make the case of the world has changed. It is the most dangerous time now in any period since the Cold War. Given how terrifying that rhetoric is, does what they're proposing match the rhetoric?
If they fully fund the 62 recommendations in the Strategic Defence Review in what I would regard as a sensible timescale, and that is 3% by 29 and 3.5% by 34, then I think we are stepping up and standing up to the concerns that the review outlines. But frankly, if we don't find the resources, and even if we don't spend the money we have got better, then frankly, it's rhetoric, it's words on a page, and it's not going to cut the mustard.
And is there any way of achieving those 62 recommendations with 2.5% in the next couple of years and possibly 3% at some point in the 2030s?
Short answer is no. And the authors of the report know that. I guess if I was to say defence ministers know that as well.
The threats we face are now more serious and less predictable than at any time since the end of the Cold War.
Unveiling the review in Commons, the Defence Secretary John Healey faced one major criticism repeated across the opposition benches.
Quite simply, they haven't got a plan to fund it. Yeah. An SDR without the funding is an empty wish list. The ships and submarines it talks of, they're a fantasy fleet.
Where is the money coming from to fund these ambitions? It's a shopping list without the money to pay for it.
Ammunition production.
Defence experts welcome the review, but are as yet unconvinced that the vast list of recommendations are all actually achievable.
It'll come back to prioritization. So 62 is a bit of a laundry list. I think we would probably need to tier those into our top 5, our top 10, and then maybe grade them in terms of achievability and timescales.
How much money would you put on all 62 of those recommendations actually being brought through to fruition?
I think that's very unlikely, particularly given the pace of adaptation and just the change in the world we see every day.
More money for high-end kit, though, may come at a significant cost to other unprotected government departments.
Giving more money to defence means there's relatively little left over for other areas. And I think there is a real probability that there may be some real terms cuts faced by some areas of spending at the spending review.
The UK is moving to a, quote, war-fighting readiness, the Defence Secretary said today. But as previous governments have found, wars can be long and both financially and politically expensive.
Paul McMurrough. Well, our political editor, Gary Gibbons, spoke to the Prime Minister during his trip to Glasgow and asked him about the scale of the threat the country now faces.
There's a very stark message in this report, isn't there? British people will be used to military operations abroad, Iraq, Afghanistan. This report is talking about how we need to assume full-scale warfare on our doorstep, with a nuclear power, potentially.
We're moving into a new era where the threat is greater than it's been for many years. We know that Russia is already threatening our skies, our waters. Cyber attacks are taking place on a very regular basis. And of course, there is conflict in Europe, and I don't think Putin is serious about peace. So we have to recognise this is a new era and be ready. But my strong belief and the driving principle in the review and for me is that the best way to deter conflict is to prepare for it, and that's the evidence of NATO over 80 years or so.
But it's also being very candid with the British people. The threat is on our doorstep. Potentially, in our front rooms, it could actually be on British soil. That's what this review is saying.
Well, my first duty is to keep
but you're
our people
reluctant
safe
to say
and
that.
secure.
You don't want to frighten people.
I'm a strong believer that if you want to deter conflict, and I do, if you want to keep this country safe, and I do, the best way to do that is to prepare for conflict. That is why we need to step up in this way, to increase our capability, to be clear that the threat is much greater than it's been for many, many years.
And urgent.
And urgent, and to press forward on that basis.
How quickly, the Chief of General Staff suggested we could be involved in a conflict with a major nuclear power in about 2 years. Are we in that sort of margin? The report isn't quite clear.
Well, let me be absolutely clear. That is not what I want to see, and everything we're doing is designed to avoid that. But we have to be clear that Russia has ambitions. We've already seen that in Ukraine. Well, we need to be ready and ramp up as quickly as possible to be in a state with our allies to make sure that collectively we can defend ourselves and Europe. And I think that is urgent. It is important. That's why I set out the review. I said to the reviewers, I want to know what the risk is now, what our capabilities are now, and whether we've got the capability to match those risks.
But you say it's urgent, but just now in a press conference you said you hope to get to 3% of GDP spending on defence, subject to economic conditions. So there seems to be a mismatch between the rhetoric and then what you're actually promising.
Well, I think let's put that in its perspective. We won the election last year saying we would take defence spending to 2.5% within the Parliament. We then fast-forwarded that to 2027, 2028, that 2.5%. We've already spent $5 billion more under this government on defence than before, and that extra spend will be $13 billion in 2027 over and above what we're spending now.
None of it quite matches the rhetoric. You're talking, the report is talking about major conflict on our doorstep, potentially within a very short number of years, but you'll increase defence spending subject to economic conditions, presumably subject to the Office for Budget Responsibility, all the normal sort of bookkeeping things. We're in a new era, as you say. Doesn't that mean a quantum leap in policy?
What you've already seen is the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. So that's already happened under the first year of this Labour
But from
government.
a hollowed-out defence,
From a hollowed-out
which
defence,
the report talks about.
From a hollowed-out defence, so we're moving at pace, faster than I think most people expected. We're also renewing and being absolutely clear about NATO first, so that collectively we never fight alone. We're making sure that as we ramp up that spending, that is seen in what I call a defence dividend, which is jobs here. We're in Scotland at the moment, but across the United Kingdom. So it goes into the pockets of working people.
Can I ask you about that? Because you talked about that in the press conference as well. There was a peace dividend after the war. The graph line for spending on health, welfare state, the rest of it went up because the defence graph line spending was going down. What we're talking about now is both graph lines going up. That's just not sustainable. That's what you would call fantasy economics, isn't it?
Well,
you're going to have to choose.
That's why the defence dividend is really important in this, which is as we spend more money, then it is important that those contracts, that procurement, is in the United Kingdom, in jobs, in security and defence,
so
well-paid
like post-war America, Cold War America, is going to be some sort of military-industrial dividend which we're all going to live on. It's a new type of Keynesianism.
Yes, I want that to be the case.
Are you sure about that? Are you sure it'll work like that?
Well, if you look at, there's over 400,000 jobs in defence and security across the country already. There's obviously the supply chains that go into that. Here in Scotland, 25,000 jobs. What we are doing will lead to more jobs. These are good, well-paid jobs. They support the supply chains that feed into those jobs, and they are jobs that provide for individuals, their families and their communities. And that is what I mean by the defence dividend, which is, yes, you're right, there was a peace dividend which was,
we can have both, and that's not fantasy economics. We're going to get both.
No, because at the heart of our argument has always been that we need to grow our economy to create wealth, and this helps us to create wealth.
You're very familiar with recent economic growth. I know you're trying to change the picture, but some people will look at this and say, well, what would Keir Starmer do if the choice was between cutting benefits? Is he going to be pushed around, as it looks like he has been, on winter fuel payments, maybe might be on the recent benefits cuts, which might be partially reversed or trimmed? Is he going to be pushed around on defence?
Well, he
says he's committed to it.
Let's be absolutely clear. My first duty is the safety and security of the British people. True it is that in the budget of last year we had to take tough decisions, including on things like pensions and the winter fuel. And we had to do that because of the circumstances we inherited. They were the right decisions. But what we've now seen is a stabilised economy. Growth is much higher than people were expecting. 4 interest rate cuts. We've just done 3 trade deals with India, the US and the EU. And in those circumstances, I think we can now look again at making more pensioners eligible for the winter fuel allowance. And that's what we'll do.
I mean, there is a sense in what you have been outlining today of a sense of barbarians at the gate. There is a real menace, a threat out there. You've also been talking about Nigel Farage and populism at home. Are there barbarians at the gate at home as well? Is there any sense in which he is a very dangerous time for this country? Do you think he's the enemy within?
Well, I think it's very important to put this into the context of the discussion we're just having. Firstly, Nigel Farage has set out tens of billions of pounds of spending that he's apparently going to do if he gets the chance, without saying where that money is coming from.
But strategically,
that is precisely what led to Liz Truss blowing up our economy.
Yes,
I don't want to see that inflicted on working people again.
Is there a special threat?
There's a second limb to this, because we're talking about the threat particularly from Russia. I know where I stand on Russia. Russia's the aggressor in Ukraine, and we've stood, the Labour Party has stood, the Labour government has stood with Ukraine throughout the conflict. Nigel Farage's approach is pro-Putin. So
he's the enemy within.
There's a world of difference. We also need to be clear, in my view, at a moment like this, as to whose side you're on. Are you pro-Ukraine or are you pro-Putin? I'm pro-Ukraine, he's pro-Putin. I think he's completely wrong about that. And as I say, I remind myself, the first duty of Prime Minister is to keep our country safe and secure, and I take that duty extremely seriously.
Prime Minister, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges is a retired US Army officer who served as Commanding General of United States Army Europe, and he joins us tonight from Frankfurt. It's an ambition, not a commitment, from the UK Prime Minister to spend 3% of national income on defence. NATO wants more, way more, doesn't it? Do you think the UK has met this moment today?
Well, obviously, this review is the result of a lot of different people working on it, looking at the challenges, the risks. How do you pay for it? These are real questions that every government, including my own in the United States, has to answer. The United States, we're nowhere near 5% ourselves. And so all of us are having to address a real threat, exactly as your Prime Minister just said.
But is 2.5 of national income on defence doing what needs to be done, given, you heard the Prime Minister there, the scale of the threat he says that we in Europe now face, especially with Donald Trump and the US scaling back what they're doing in Europe?
Well, look, 2.5 is not going to be enough. I think when you go back to the Cold War, when all of us working together were able to deter the Soviet Union from ever making that terrible decision, we were spending 3, 4, 5% of GDP. So I think we have to recalculate what's acceptable and what's achievable. And I think UK will, as always, end up doing its fair share. But look, the Russians, clearly the aggressor, and I'm glad that the Prime Minister said that. But our leaders have to talk to our populations as if they are adults and explain it. And they got to do it in a detailed sort of way that talks about why we have to, all of us, increase sea power, air power, protection of infrastructure. The Russians are at war with us, even if it doesn't look like it in terms of missiles and rockets. They clearly are at war with us now. And so the sooner we can figure out how to stop them, what they're doing in the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, and damaging infrastructure and sabotage, the better chance we have to dissuade them from ever actually going to the next level of warfare.